Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be focusing on India.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at a case, Campaign Saroj Rani v. Sudarshan Kumar Chadha from 1984.
All right.
And it deals with this concept called restitution of conjugal rights.
Now, that sounds like a...
It sounds very...
old-fashioned term.
It does sound very old-fashioned. But it really gets at some, I think, really important questions about marriage and individual freedom and the role of law in our personal lives. So
yeah, I mean, this case really opens up like a Pandora's box of issues that were being debated in India at the time.
Okay.
You know, you have this story about one couple.
Right.
But it becomes like a lightning rod for this much bigger discussion about changing social norms and the very nature of marriage itself.
So give us the backstory here.
Okay.
What happened?
We start with this couple, Saroj Rani and Sudarshan Kumar Chadha.
Okay.
They got married back in 1975, had 2 daughters.
Okay.
By 1977, things had fallen apart.
Okay.
They separated.
Okay.
And Saroj Rani, wanting to kind of salvage the relationship, filed a suit for restitution of conjugal rights.
Interesting.
Under Section 9 of the Hindu Marriage Act.
Of 1955.
Yes, of 1955.
So this Hindu Marriage Act, I have to admit, this is new for me.
Sure, yeah.
So can you give us just a little bit
of course. So the Hindu Marriage Act, or HMA, as it's often called, was a really landmark piece of legislation that codified marriage laws for Hindus in India. It was passed in 1955. A time when India was, you know, a newly independent nation.
Right.
And there's this real push to kind of modernize laws and social structures.
So this act was part of like a larger movement.
Exactly. It was part of this wave of reform that was happening.
Got it.
And within this act, Section 9 dealt with this concept of conjugal rights, which basically meant the right of a husband or wife to each other's companionship. And let's just say marital obligations.
Okay. So that's where this case comes in.
Yes.
Saroj Rani is invoking this Section 9 and asking the court to essentially order her husband back home.
Exactly. That's exactly what she's doing.
Wow.
But here's where the case takes an unexpected turn.
Okay.
Sudarshan Kumar Chadha, initially, he fights the suit.
Okay.
But then he agrees to the restitution of conjugal rights.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
So this leads to a consent decree, which means a court order based on the agreement of both parties. Seems like, you know, a victory for Saroj Rani.
Yeah.
Chance for reconciliation.
Right. I'm going to guess things didn't exactly go to plan.
Not quite. Yeah. Things did not go as smoothly as she might have hoped.
Okay.
Even with this legally binding decree in place.
Right.
They never actually lived together again. And it makes you question, you know, was the husband sincere?
Right.
About reconciliation?
Yeah.
Or was something else going on?
Okay. So what happened next?
About a year later.
Okay.
Sudarshan Kumar Chadha. The husband
who just agreed.
Who had just agreed to come back. Files for divorce. And the reason he gives the lack of cohabitation.
The lack of cohabitation that
resulted from the consent decree.
Oh my gosh.
It was quite a legal maneuver.
That's incredible. So he agrees to come back.
Yeah.
Doesn't come back.
Right.
And then uses that.
Uses that as the grounds for divorce.
As grounds for divorce. It sounds like he was.
It certainly raised some eyebrows within the legal community.
I bet.
And, you know, this case bounced back and forth between courts.
Okay.
The district judge initially denied the divorce. The high court referred it to a division bench.
Okay.
And finally, they decided to grant the divorce.
Okay. So on the surface, this seems like a messy divorce with some legal maneuvering.
Right.
But you said earlier that this case became something much bigger.
Exactly.
So what made it so significant?
Well, this case, with all of its twists and turns, became this focal point, a national debate about the constitutionality of Section 9 itself.
Okay.
Remember, the HMA was created in a period of social change.
Yeah.
But it was also rooted in traditional ideas about marriage.
So was this law that allowed one spouse to force the other back home?
Right.
Was that even fair?
That is exactly the question that people were grappling with.
Okay.
And there were strong arguments on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you had folks who saw Section 9 as just this like blatant violation of individual rights, especially the right to privacy and personal liberty.
Okay.
Forcing someone back into a relationship.
Yeah.
Potentially a physical one.
Right.
I mean, that it felt archaic.
Yeah. It does. Yeah.
And it went against this whole idea of autonomy. Right. It was becoming so important in modern India.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I imagine there was pushback.
Oh, absolutely.
To changing this law.
There's a lot of pushback.
What were the arguments for keeping it?
So on the flip side, you had people arguing that this law actually served a really important social purpose.
Okay.
They saw it as a way to try and encourage reconciliation.
Okay.
To potentially save marriages.
Right.
And to kind of uphold the sanctity of this institution that had been, so central to Indian society for centuries.
So is this clash between individual rights and traditional values?
It was this tension between individual freedom and those societal expectations around marriage.
And this wasn't just
some abstract debate. This was playing out in the legal system as well.
Oh.
You had different high courts across India coming to different conclusions about Section 9.
Oh, wow. Okay, so can you give us an example?
Sure. So the Andhra Pradesh High Court, in a case called T. Saritha V. Venkata Subbiah, they actually ruled against Section 9.
Wow, okay.
They said that it violated a person's fundamental right to liberty.
So there was a precedent.
There was a legal precedent for striking down this law. But it wasn't a uniform opinion across the board.
Okay.
The Delhi High Court, in another case called Sep Harvinder Kaur v. Harmander Singh Chowdhury, took the opposite stance.
Wow.
They upheld Section 9.
Okay.
They said it was constitutional.
Okay.
And that it served a valid purpose.
So it must have been a confusing time.
It was definitely a confusing time. Yeah. Because you have the courts themselves divided on this really fundamental issue.
Yeah.
And it just highlights how complex this debate was.
Yeah.
And how much it resonated within Indian society.
So with all this happening, Saroj Rani v. Sudarshan Kumar Chadha, with all these twists and turns and all these social implications, landed at the highest court in the land.
Yes.
The Supreme Court of India.
The Supreme Court of India.
What did they decide?
So, in a decision that had really lasting consequences, the Supreme Court upheld Section 9 of the HMA.
Wow.
So it remained legal for spouses to seek restitution of conjugal rights.
I imagine that was a disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, for those who saw this law as outdated and unjust, that was a blow.
Right.
But I think it's important to understand the Supreme Court's reasoning here. They weren't just saying like, it's the law, end of story. They really delved into the historical and societal context of conjugal rights in India.
So they were trying to strike a balance.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
They were acknowledging that.
Yeah.
Conjugal rights, this right of a husband or a wife to each other's company and affection, that wasn't just like a legal creation.
Right.
These rights, the court argued, were inherent in the very institution of marriage itself.
Okay.
Deeply rooted in Indian tradition and culture.
So it's not just a legal right. It's like something...
It's something deeper, more fundamental.
Okay, so if it's not just a legal right, but something more deeply embedded in society, then how did the court reconcile that with potentially violating individual freedom?
That's where the Supreme Court gets into the nitty-gritty of how Section 9 is supposed to be applied. They're very clear that this wasn't about forcing people to live together against their will or to compel like physical intimacy.
So no more like throwing someone in jail for refusing to share a bed.
No more of that.
Okay.
The court emphasized that the main purpose of Section 9 was to encourage reconciliation.
Okay.
It was meant to be this legal pathway for couples to try to work through their differences and potentially save their marriage.
I'm starting to see the nuance in this decision.
Right.
So how did they address the concerns about this law being misused to force people into these unwanted situations?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court made it clear that the ways to actually enforce Section 9 were pretty limited.
Okay.
It wasn't like you could, drag someone kicking and screaming back home.
Okay. So what could you actually do if your spouse just refused to return?
The main recourse was something called attachment of property.
Oh.
Basically, if a spouse repeatedly refused to return to the marital home, the court could seize some of their assets.
Oh, okay.
It was meant to be a financial incentive to comply.
So not brute force.
Not brute force.
But more of a financial penalty.
Yeah, more of a financial consequence.
Got it.
And even then, it was meant to be like a last resort.
Okay.
The court stressed that the goal was reconciliation.
Right.
Not punishment.
Okay.
They wanted to give couples a chance to repair their marriage.
Right.
But they recognized that forcing someone into cohabitation ultimately went against the spirit of the law.
So while they upheld this law, they really emphasized its purpose as a path towards reconciliation.
Not a tool for coercion.
Not a tool for coercion.
It sounds like they were trying to find this middle ground.
Trying to find that balance between these competing interests.
In a really complex situation.
In a very complex situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like this case really exposed this tension.
Absolutely.
Between these two ideas.
Yeah.
Individual rights.
Individual rights.
And societal expectations around marriage.
That tension is at the heart of this case.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember the context.
We're talking about India in the 1980s.
Right.
The country was still relatively young as an independent nation.
Right.
And they were grappling with how to modernize their laws, how to modernize their social structures while also respecting their cultural heritage.
So this Hindu Marriage Act and this case surrounding Section 9 were part of this larger...
It was all part of this larger conversation that India was having about its identity.
About its identity.
And its future.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to see how this one case, you know, about this one couple really brings up these bigger questions about how societies are dealing with, like, what marriage even means anymore.
And it's not just an Indian question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this tension between individual freedom and the societal expectations around marriage.
Right.
This is something that plays out.
It's everywhere.
All over the world.
Yeah. Makes you think about how different cultures view the role of law in these personal relationships. Should it even be used to force people to stay together? Or should that be a personal decision?
It's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answers.
Yeah.
Each society kind of draws the line in a different place.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it in some cultures.
Yeah.
Divorce is still like super stigmatized or even illegal.
Right.
And then in other places, marriage is seen as like just a contract that you can break.
If it's not working for you anymore.
It's not benefiting the people involved anymore.
Yeah, it raises this question.
Right.
Is there like a universal right to just walk away from a marriage no matter what?
No matter what.
Or does society have like a vested interest in preserving these unions?
Interest.
Even if it means like some legal intervention.
Yeah. And the Saroj Rani case, it really reminds us that these aren't just like theoretical debates.
Right.
These have like real world consequences for people's lives.
Right.
For their happiness, for their fundamental freedoms.
And the Supreme Court seemed to recognize this in their judgment.
Yeah.
They took steps to make sure that Saroj Rani was taken care of.
Yes.
Even though the divorce was granted.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
So beyond just ordering the husband to pay maintenance to Saroj Rani and their daughter, the court's interpretation of Section 9 itself was really significant. They shifted the focus away from just enforcing cohabitation and more towards encouraging like dialogue and resolution.
So even though they upheld this law that some people saw as outdated, they also kind of reinterpreted it in a way that aligned with more modern ideas about individual choice.
Exactly.
It's pretty fascinating.
It's striking that balance between tradition and modernity.
Yeah. And it's remarkable how this one case brings all these complex issues to light.
Yeah.
You know, forces India to examine its laws.
It's like holding a mirror up to society.
Its values and its very understanding of what marriage is.
And the ripples from this case, they're still being felt today. I mean, it's still a reference point in discussions about individual rights, gender equality, and how families are changing in India.
So for our listener... who's now gone on this deep dive with us into Saroj Rani v. Sudarshan Kumar Chadha. What would you say is like the key takeaway?
Here's something to think about.
Okay.
How does this case make you reflect on your own beliefs about marriage? Do you see it primarily as a personal choice?
Okay.
Or is it something that has these broader societal implications?
Yeah. And building on that, do you think the law should have any role?
Right.
In compelling people to stay together?
To stay in a relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, there are really strong arguments to be made on both sides. Yeah. And I think this case gives us a framework for understanding how complex this debate really is.
We've really gone from the specifics of this one couple's dispute to like this much broader conversation.
There's this much broader exploration of
about marriage law and individual rights in India.
Exactly.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating.
It's all about connecting those dots.
Yeah.
Seeing how these seemingly isolated events can spark these much larger conversations and challenge our assumptions about the world around us.
Well, thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
On this journey into the intricacies of Knight Saroj Rani v. Sudarshan Kumar Chadha. It's a case that even decades later still has the power to really make us think.
It really does.
About the relationship between law and society and these ever-changing ideas about human relationships.
Absolutely.
We encourage you to keep exploring this topic.
Yes, delve deeper.
Delve deeper.
Into the legal arguments.
Yeah.
Think about how these principles might apply to other areas of life.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.